Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over what you should be doing with all of your excess medals as far as the best troops to put them into, as well as some of the methodology in actually using your excess medals. So of course, as far as medals are concerned, you really only need 3 of each of the current medals that exist, with the only exception being Medal of Anu. The main reason for this is up to 3 of every single one of these can stack. Medal of Anu, however, does not stack. The way that the 20% mana works on this is that it just takes the highest amount of mana that you have. So if you have a 50% and a 20%, it's just going to take your 50%. Similarly, if you have multiple 20%, it's just going to give you 20%. It does not stack to give you any extra. So for every single other one, you'd want to have up to 3, but Medal of Anu, you can keep at 1. As far as being able to use these on troops, you need to make sure that you have them fully upgraded to Mythic. So you have to have them at level 20. Fully ascended to Mythic, and all 3 of their traits, at which point you can start putting medals on them. Every single type within the game gains different amount of stats based on whatever their typing is. Right here you can see it is a defender, so it gains a lot of HP while gaining a little bit of armor, and a bunch of all the different roles give a different combination of stats, obviously with the better stats generally being magic. However, depending on the troop, certain stats could be better, such as, for example, Yagwei getting something like HP because he has an HP boost ratio, and there's a few instances like that where magic isn't necessarily the best stats that they end up accumulating. As far as things that happened recently, it is also possible to now check which ones you have upgraded in the most recent patch that came out a few days ago. It has mostly irrelevant things that were just quality of life things, but now you can actually see elite levels, which is what these post-level 20 levels are called. I normally just call them medaling, as you're using medals onto them, but they're technically called elite levels as far as the game is concerned. You cannot sort by rarity in this regard, but it will at least show you all of the ones that you currently have any amount of medals in. Hopefully it'll add some additional sorting options into the future. One really noteworthy thing that you do want to consider when using and upgrading your troops when using medals is the fact that currently in the state of the game, doing mythics and base mythics and base epics is kind of pointless. The main reason why base epics is pointless at the moment is the same kind of reason why they were pointless to trait way back when traits first came into the game. For any of you that remembered, trait stones, of course, quite expensive to end up getting epics up. End up costing 12 arcanes, whereas a legend costs 16 and a ultra rare costs 3. And the main reason why a legend was better was because it had unique traits, and an ultra rare was better because it was much cheaper. And that's basically the exact same thing that ended up happening to epics as far as medals are concerned. While you can end up medaling up your epics, it is generally not worth it, mainly because it is better spent to use it on ultra rares. As far as upgrading ultra rares, or any troop for that matter, the first 2 levels that you end up putting onto it will only cost 1 of the rarity, 2 of the rarity, and then 3 of the rarity. However, for its final level, you can simply go use 1 of the rarity above to cover all that you need. So right now we only need 1 to get this ultra rare to max. Then once we get it upgraded again, we would end up needing 2 of these. However, once we have it to the final one, we could end up just using 1 epic one rather than using 3 ultra rares in order to get its final medal to max. So generally, you're not really going to be using any of your epic medals on epics. Rather, you're going to be using them on the 3rd gold level on all of your ultra rares in order to get them maxed. So very, very, very rarely are you actually going to be upgrading epics. The main reason you don't want to do mythics is a somewhat obvious one, mainly because they are absurdly hard to go get. While there are quite a few mythics that would gain quite a bit of benefit, with Iron Gut probably being one of the more noteworthy ones, of course, it just isn't worth it. I'm pretty sure most people right now don't even have 3 medals of Nisha, let alone extras to be able to use on mythics. And in the current state of the game, it just isn't worth it at the moment. However, with all that being said, let's go over all of the best 4 per rarity, including the useless ones I just mentioned. But do be mindful, just don't put them into epics and mythics at the moment. But all the other rarities, all good. So as far as commons, we have several that are worth it. Dragon Egg, also called Deviled Eggs now because it ends up gaining these following stats. Wait, does it not show it on this thing anymore? Oh gosh, do we have to go to the other thing to be able to see it underneath the, where did they hide it to? I know they added like a different page for it now. I guess you can still see it on their final thing here. So this ends up gaining 6 attack, 6 HP, and 6 armor, the 666. So this obviously makes Egg quite a bit decent in that it's going to be gaining a bunch of HP, or a bunch of durability, on top of its already really high durability, as well as having a higher attack, which is good because this troop actually has a base attack of 0. So all the attack it has is actually entirely from all these bonuses that you see right here. So this ends up making it really good with something like a Egg Thief that can constantly keep summoning this. Not only is an extremely tanky troop with one of the highest durabilities in the entire game, but it also has higher attack, which makes up for the fact that it has a ridiculously low base attack, tied at the lowest in the entire game. So that ends up making it a little bit more even, still really underwhelming attack value, but makes it a little bit more viable when using it with a Egg Thief and any kind of team that would end up being utilized with such. As far as other things that are good underneath commons, as far as any of the Guardian troops, the 6 Guardian troops like Humility, Loyalty, Justice, stuff like that, any of those are going to be really good options. Obviously, Humility being one of the slightly better ones, mainly because it can actually utilize the extra stats that it gets a little bit better. It ends up gaining a high amount of HP and armor from its elite levels, with the HP being the most relevant thing, because whenever it takes damage to its HP, it ends up giving all allies additional armor and magic, with the most relevant thing, of course, being magic, and the main purpose of Humility is to use it in first slot or second slot in order to feed your entire team a bunch of magic. Great option for doing that, and being able to upgrade it for so cheap, which is the common upgrades, ends up making it a very viable option, which you can even do in early game. Speaking of early game, Dire Wolf, a really great early game option, ends up gaining a lot of good offense once you get it upgraded. Ends up gaining a total of 4 magic, 2 HP, 2 armor, and 2 attack. Basically well-rounded all around. Has really good utility in that it can end up getting a entangle and then doing 4 times damage, 2 times based on its entrapment, and 2 times based on the fact that it does Hunter's Mark for 4 times total, and it gains a little bit extra attack, a little bit of magic for the poke, and just overall going to gain pretty good value. Other than that, Skeleton ends up gaining a nice little mix as well, gaining mostly in the 666 category for attack, armor, and HP. Doesn't gain any magic, however, it doesn't really need any magic because you're not normally using it for its magic itself. The main reason you're using a skeleton on your team is for the skull creation that it has, and this will allow it to be a little bit more survivable, as well as if it happens to be in your second slot or third slot, or particularly your second slot, and it ends up your first slot dying, you'll have a little bit of higher attack to be able to utilize him. Way back in the game, he used to actually gain attack off of his ability, but now he gains armor because attack was just way too strong. However, now he can gain a little bit more attack back, at least by medaling him up. So that's one way to kind of make it up. As far as rares, the most noteworthy thing underneath rares is actually pretty relevant to what today is. Of course, today is a bounty hunter event, and one of the best rares to end up upgrading is basically every single bounty hunter troop. This is particularly relevant to whatever the bounty captain is, though the most relevant one of all of the bounties, of course, is Tagraki Warrior. Tagraki is the highest damage source bounty hunter troop currently in the game. He has a really high base value for true damage. Not only that, he has a 3-to-1 boost ratio based on their armor, making it one of the only few bounty hunter troops that can actually upscale properly, and that just makes it the strongest bounty in the game. As far as what it actually gains for skills, it gains a nice variety of offensive capability for the most part. Gains 2 attack, 4 magic, and then 2 in both the durability sections. So very well rounded, makes him a little bit tankier, makes him a little bit more skull output, and mostly his magic, which gives him a substantial amount more true damage, which stacks with his 3-to-1 boost ratio, allowing him to be able to get kills a little bit quicker. So really great option. Some other things to consider, as I mentioned, are whatever the bounty captain is for the week, as well as Parrot is a pretty good option due to its double silence. Doesn't gain too much of a benefit, but it's already such a good bounty troop. Next up, as far as rares, Greed. Greed, one of the most noteworthy things that ends up happening with a Greed is mostly that he ends up gaining HP based, or he ends up gaining gold based on his HP. So having a higher HP value is very useful for him, as it gets you closer to max gold with your first cast. You don't really need to worry about this too much if you're using something like a Cedric in some teams. However, if you're using him without any kind of Cedric, or if you're using him in the PvP situation where you want to get as close to max gold as quickly as possible, Greed is going to be a little bit better of an option now that he has a little bit more HP. And you'll be able to bring that even closer by HP buffing him with metals if you wanted to go down that route as well. So in combination of upgrading him while also using metals, and you'll end up being able to get all that extra gold to ideally get to as close to max capacity as possible, possibly even all the way to max using a bunch of metals in combination with that little bit of buff that he gets from being metalled. Other than that, obviously the Cockatrice is a pretty standard all good troop. It does mostly just gain durability though, just pure HP, pure armor. However, you're generally using a Cockatrice in higher level content that it might be able to die a bit easier on, so it having pure durability isn't necessarily a bad thing. Would have been nice if it got a little bit of attack too, because it does have a relatively low attack value, and not to mention it has double damage against entangles. It didn't end up getting that, however, a little bit better durability in a higher level content will allow it to survive longer, so you can keep entangling the enemy and keep mana draining the enemy, so good utility to have, and having it upgraded will make it even better. Other than that, this is more so an early game upgrade than a late game or end game kind of upgrade, but it is worth considering to get the Dragatar upgraded, mainly because he gains a well-rounded amount of offensive stats and a decent amount of durability. He's generally used in something like a first slot anyways on various dragon teams, and it's all around to make him a better first slot, so definitely good to consider if you're still running a little bit earlier into the game, particularly around the area where Dragon Soul is still really relevant for offensive purposes. Once that starts dropping out a bit, you don't really use him as much. Like, beyond level 1000, this wouldn't be as relevant, but below level 1000, particularly if you own a Dragon Soul, this is an extremely relevant thing, and possibly even one of the first rares you'd want to consider as your upgrades. As far as ultra rares, we have ourselves quite a few utilities. There is such a gigantic amount of utilities, and which one you go for really just depends on what route you want to go. As far as ultra rares are concerned, and pretty much all rarities in general, anything with empowered tends to be the way to go. But as far as Apothecary here, which actually doesn't have Empower, Apothecary, of course, is one of the better converters in the game. Unfortunately, it does only gain durability, but again, it is used similar to Cockatrice in that it's used mostly for higher level content, in that you might be using it with Mang, you might be using it with Iron Gut, you might be using it with Mountain Crusher to feed into other really big units, and it having 24 overall extra durability is basically one whole extra hit in higher level content that you'll be able to survive, so great option to have. Even though it's not necessarily going to help you win a bit quicker, it'll make sure you don't end up losing your great utility troops. She has a nice cleanse, and brown mana is extremely strong in the current state of the game. Other than that, also has a bunch of immunities, which with its higher durability will make it even harder to kill. Other than that, as I mentioned, anything with Empowered, always good options. Leprechaun, probably one of the more relevant things to end up getting up. Similar to the Apothecary, it just gains pure durability, it just gains HP and armor in order to just not die as easily. Again, Leprechaun's also one of those kind of troops that's generally used in higher level content, though it can be used for pretty much any piece of content in the entire game. Extremely good troop, possibly even like top 5 in the entire game right now, simply because it's empowered into mass explosion while also having a mana link, so overall just very, very well rounded with everything it does, not to mention it's passively going to be giving you some extra gold as you're doing these battles, which not a lot of teams can really do unless you're building like a pure gold farming team with Cedric, so always a great option to have, and giving him a little bit more durability by meddling him is definitely a great option to consider. Other than that, Spirit Fox, really annoying Empower troop. Main noteworthy thing about this is it has Empowered into a mana drain. Main thing that this ends up giving it by getting upgraded is mostly just a little bit higher of a mana drain. It brings it up to scale a little bit more with some other options out there. Still not the absolute greatest as far as damage, just gaining a little bit of magic by the extra 3. However, it does end up adding up, and that with its little bit extra durability combined with its stealthy will just make it a little bit more survivable against AoE, split damage, and stuff like that if you happen to be using it for a little bit of a longer battle. But mostly just a ideal mana drainer, particularly good against things that have Empowered on the enemy team. So if you're up against an Empowered option, always a good option to consider a Spirit Fox to immediately deny it before the enemy can end up getting it out. Other than that, Goblin Rocket, always a pretty fun utility. Has a pretty high win rate, however, a pretty slow speed. But you can end up increasing his speed some by, of course, meddling him. He ends up gaining a nice range of stats, mostly focused into magic and attack, gaining a total of 2 attack and 4 magic. And given that he tends to cast his ability a lot, those 4 magic will end up adding up. Also, he ends up having a adjacent damage, or a light splash now, compared to what he used to have before, which was only a 1 adjacent damage. And with that 4 extra magic, that would be 1 whole additional damage to his light splash. Not too much, but given that he spams a lot, that does end up adding up to be quite a bit of damage over the course of a battle. Still a slow option, but great utility troop. Other than that, we have ourselves the epic medals. These again are ones that I would generally avoid doing. However, if you were to go for one epic and then just stop and not do any other epic, I would consider going for Gargoyle as the best and probably only epic that you should upgrade. Main reason for this is if you've ever seen any invasion that I ever do, or not invasion, any faction that we ever do, particularly the Tuesday factions, we tend to use Gargoyle a lot. And the main reason for this is he has a boost ratio based on attack. He ends up having a attack boost ratio based on 3-to-1 of his attack across the entire team. So having higher attack on your team will end up making his damage output higher. Not to mention, generally, most teams you run him on, not all, but most, will end up using 2 gargoyles, and those will end up boosting off each other if you have them medaled. Because, of course, that extra attack is still across your team, and he would end up getting the boost ratio from both those extra attacks. But even if you're just using one, he is getting 5 additional damage from having fully medaled, 4 directly from his magic, and 1 from the 4 attack, and possibly more if you're using a second one on your team, in which case it's gaining almost 3 additional damage based on that attack across your team. So really, really great option for pretty much all level content that's around your durability. It's also particularly good in any kind of piece of content where you're going to be gaining extra stats through the event itself. So, for example, low-level dooms and low-level factions, things like that. Things where you're just naturally starting with a higher attack than you normally have, or it tends to be the locations where you tend to use Gargoyle, and having them with even higher stats will make those battles even quicker than normal. So if you were to upgrade one and only Mythic, or one or only Epic, I would definitely consider going for Gargoyle. As far as every other Epic, I would, in the current state of the game, ignore them. However, if you want some other options, Azura is next, I would say, and this is mainly due to the fact that you can gain durability. It is generally used, or one of its more useful purposes is using it in first slot or second slot on a blue or purple Guild War day as a mana generation accumulation method. And one nice thing that you can do from getting it medaled, of course, is giving it higher durability. It is a relatively squishy troop, and being able to give it enough to survive one more hit is a nice utility to have, particularly in a Guild War context. Again, wouldn't really go out of my way for it, but it is worth considering. Other than that, basically any epic with Empower will do. So anything like a Gimlet, Mercy, and any other Empower epic in the game are things to consider, as they are generally used a decent amount as various utility options. And similar to things like Leprechaun and as such, they are simply given those extra stats, generally just HP and armor, in order for them to not die. Still, I would avoid them, but they are worth considering. Other than that, Legendaries. These are relatively hard, even though you only need to keep one Legendary token in the current state of the game, since you only need one Anu. So you might have a little bit more Legends in that regard. They are still relatively rare. Not as rare as Mythics, obviously, but still towards the rarer side. If you were to go for any one Legend first, I would highly 100% say to go for Yagwe. Not only is a great bounty hunter option, which of course is this weekend, if you're watching this right now as we're posting the video, but not only is he a good bounty hunter option, he's often used in Yagwe Queen Tanya teams, which is one of the stronger teams in the game. He's also used quite often for red and green Guild War days, since he basically just loops into himself, and depending on how lucky you get off the board, he can be a one-man team and just solo the entire enemy team. He ends up gaining a decent amount of stats as well, being able to gain a lot of attack, HP, and magic, all 3 of which he utilizes, since he tends to be towards second slot, so he'll end up getting to use that attack once your first slot dies. He boost ratios off of HP, and magic just increases his damage directly, and since he gets to hit 2 enemies and generally gets to loop a little bit, he ends up getting to utilize that extra damage quite a decent amount between the HP and magic that he ends up getting from that. Next up is Queen Tanya. This is actually the first one that I'm showing that gains a stat like this. There are a few other ones that gain like this, like Sunbird or Wayne, though however, given that they're split damage, they don't gain as much of a benefit. However, anything that gains 6 magic like this that hits all enemies tends to be a pretty good upgrade option. Not all of them, because not all of them are really, really good as far as what their base ability is, but any of them that do have a good base ability, for example, Queen Tanya, are definitely worth considering. Queen Tanya already an insanely good ability. She has a full AoE that's probably one of the strongest in the game when combined with all the factors. Not only is it already an above average base damage, she ends up getting a boost ratio per red within the battle. So not only based on your allies, but also on your enemies. So even herself, she ends up getting that boost ratio for. And if there's 13 plus red, she ends up getting extra turn, meaning you could theoretically loop it depending on how much red you spam onto the board, such as if you have a Yagway on your team to synergize with it. And that alone would already be massive enough, but you also get 6 additional magic by getting it all the way metaled, and on top of that, you also have 50% Fairy Fire, which ends up increasing the amount of magic damage you do, or how much spell damage you end up doing by 50%. So basically, that 6 extra magic you gave her is technically now 9 extra magic, because you're going to get that 50% boosted, meaning she gains pretty much the most amount of magic theoretically out of any single troop that you can end up upgrading with medals. So definitely something to end up considering with your medaling upgrade. Does take a while to get legendaries, but definitely one up higher on the list. Similar to Queen Titania, though I would get Queen Titania first. Zachi, pretty much for the exact same reason, is worth upgrading. It ends up gaining 6 additional magic. This one has a different kind of loop option in that it gets a little bit of explosion, a little bit more like a cheaper version of Infernus. So if you kind of wanted more of an Infernus-like troop, but obviously you don't have the medals to be able to upgrade Infernus, Queen Zachi is probably the next best bet to go. Not the absolute overall best troop in the game, given that it's an AoE and that can be hard countered by both Reflect and Submerge in the current state of the game. It is still an option to end up considering, as it gets both a board clear, mana accumulation, and a high damage output that is made even higher by getting it metaled. Next up, we have a Web Spinner. While Web Spinner does not gain any kind of additional skull damage, which is generally how it's used in the current state of the game, it does gain additional magic, and if you're using it more so in a Green Loop Guild War day, or some kind of instance of a team where you're more so using it for its loop rather than for its skull damage, or both simultaneously, it can gain quite a substantial amount of extra damage. It has a relatively low damage to begin with, and you'll be able to give it a 6, which in the current state of the game is basically a 50% increase, actually a little bit more than a 50% increase. So definitely worth considering as a option if you're wanting to use Web Spinner more so as a caster rather than as a strictly skull spam option, because in the current state of the game with how high its skull damage is, it's almost always used for skulls. But if you finally get it fully metaled, you could use it simultaneously for both a good skull option while also a good casting option. So definitely worth considering. And other than that, we have the Mythics, which generally you're not really going to be upgrading. Not because they're bad, almost every single Mythic in the game gains a pretty substantial benefit from being upgraded. The only problem is, do you have 3 Initias? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure very, very few people do, and anyone who does, they're just holding them because they'd much prefer to have the plus 12 magic bonus than using them on Mythics. Because to be able to get a Mythic fully upgraded at a 100% rate without wasting any, you will end up needing 6 Medals of Nisha, which is a lot of Medals of Nisha. Not to mention, if you want to get one fully upgraded and still have 3 spares, that means you need 9 Medals of Nisha. And I currently have 1, and barely even working on the second. I think we have like 1.5, barely, not even 1.5. And yeah, I'm pretty sure most people haven't even like golded a Mythic yet, unless they happen to have gotten really lucky by using lower percents. But it is really ridiculously time-consuming in the current state of the game, and is generally not worth doing. However, if you are going to bother doing it rather than using them onto Legends, first thing you'd probably want to consider, at least in the current state of the game, is Iron Gut. Iron Gut does gain extra attack, and obviously that is very, very good. His Devour rate is based on attack, so being able to give that extra to him is quite substantial for his percent chance. There's basically a 4% extra chance that he will end up getting Devour. Other than that, he also gains 4 magic. His base damage on his ability is relatively low when you don't end up getting Devour, and this will help out a little bit if you happen to be in a situation where you are up against Impervious and you just happen to not have any kind of counter due to all of its immune to Devour, or to at least allow you to be able to use it as a little bit of a poke damage, a little bit better than it would be able to do with that 4 additional magic. Not really as important as the 4 attack, but of course 4 attack being the main component there. As far as other things, basically anything that gains this higher magic again, anything that has these +6, obviously magic is the best stat in the game, and anything that's going to be gaining a lot of it, particularly Mythics, tend to benefit a lot from gaining these stats, so definitely worth considering. Furnace already a really great damage option, 3 damage per turn to all enemies, Firestorm into its own color, into a mass explosion, into a bunch of splash damage. It basically has a little bit of everything that you would ever need from a damage source, and you can get it even 6 higher than it normally would be simply by getting it metaled. So definitely a option to consider. Quadicus is a very, very similar option to that. It's not all in on magic, though it gains a pretty substantial amount of magic while having a little bit more of a split. Gains 4 magic while gaining 2 into all other stats. So just a little bit more well-rounded than that of a Infernus. So not as much in the damage aspect, but a little bit more in its durability. And in combination with the fact that it has Submerge, will definitely make it a little bit more of a better survivability option between 25% spell reduction, gaining those extra stats, and Submerge. So something of a little bit of a different angle compared to that of Infernus. And other than that, Wardbreaker for the very similar reason of the extra magic, and basically any other mythic for the most part, like Element Grim and anything else that has this +6 magic, tends to be pretty good. And obviously, mainly because any of these full AoEs are going to be gaining the full amount of benefit from this. They're going to be gaining around 24 extra damage, assuming that there is 4 enemies on the opposing team, just from simply having it fully metaled up. And that is a lot of damage to be able to have as extra. It's obviously not as good on things like Sunbird and Rowan, where you're only getting 6 damage and it's just split, so you're not only getting a static 6. On anything that hits full AoE or multiple enemies in any way, shape, or form that gains extra magic is definitely gaining a very big benefit off it. But yeah, to recap, mostly focus on commons, rares, and ultra rares. You throw your epic medals into your ultra rares. You throw your mythic medals into your legends once you even have more than 3 of them, which is a job in itself to even go and get that many. And as far as commons, you focus mostly on the Guardian troops and things that can be summoned by other troops. As far as rares, you focus mostly on Bounty Hunter troops. As far as ultra rares, you focus mostly on utility troops, like things that have empowered or things that you use for higher level content. Epics you completely ignore. And legends, you just go for the really big damage sources like Yagwe, Queen Titania, and similar other options. But anyways, guys, that'll wrap it up for this video. If you guys have any other questions about medals or anything else related to Gems of War, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will catch you all later. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you so much for watching.